The day I caught my sister consoling my husband about my barrenness was the day my world shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces. I stood frozen in our hallway, my hands still gripping the shopping bags I'd brought home early from my grocery run, listening to their voices drift from our kitchen. My name is Grace, and until that moment, I thought I had a perfect life. A loving husband of 5 years, a close relationship with my younger sister, and a beautiful home in the suburbs of Boston. The only cloud in our sky was our struggle to conceive, but Gerald and I were working through it together. Or so I thought. "It's not your fault," Violet's voice cooed. "You've done everything you could. Grace is the one who can't give you what you want." The shopping bags slipped from my fingers, but I caught them before they hit the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I inched closer to the kitchen doorway. Gerald's voice cracked. "I want a family so badly, Vi. Every time I see a father with his kids at the park, it kills me inside." "I know, sweetie. I know." The tenderness in my sister's voice made me sick. "Have you considered other options?" "What do you mean?" "Well," Violet paused. "The doctors confirmed it's Grace's problem, right? Maybe it's time to think about moving on. Finding someone who can give you the family you deserve." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I waited for Gerald to defend me, to shut down this conversation, to tell my sister she was out of line. Instead, I heard him sigh. "I can't do that to Grace. But she's doing it to you." Violet's voice rose with fake concern. "She's stealing your chance at happiness, at having children. Every day you stay with her is another day you're losing." I backed away from the doorway, my vision blurring. The shopping bags finally dropped, sending oranges rolling across the hardwood floor. The conversation in the kitchen stopped abruptly. "Grace," Gerald called out. "Is that you?" I couldn't face them. Not yet. I turned and ran out the front door, ignoring their calls behind me. I drove to the only place I could think of, Irene's house. My best friend took one look at my face and pulled me inside. "What happened?" I collapsed onto her couch, the words spilling out between sobs. "They're plotting against me, Irene. My own sister, my husband." "Slow down." Irene sat beside me, holding my hands. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the fertility treatments, about how each negative pregnancy test felt like a knife in my heart, about how Gerald had grown distant over the past few months, and how Violet had been spending more time at our house, always there to support us through our struggles. "Something's not right," Irene said after I finished. "Have you seen these medical reports yourself? The ones saying you're the problem?" I shook my head. "Gerald always handles the medical stuff. He says it stresses me out too much. Call your doctor's office." "Now." Irene handed me her phone. "Request copies of everything." My hands shook as I dialed the number. 10 minutes later, I hung up, my face pale. "What is it?" Irene asked. They said they never ran those tests on me. The ones Gerald showed me, they don't exist in their records." Irene's expression hardened. "Grace, I think you need to do some digging. This doesn't add up." Later that evening, I forced myself to return home. Gerald was waiting in the living room, pacing. "Where have you been?" I was worried sick. He rushed to hug me, but I stepped back. "I needed some air," I said, watching his face carefully. "After dropping those groceries." He relaxed slightly. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." I met his eyes. "Where's Violet?" "She left." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Grace, she was just trying to help." "Help who, Gerald?" My voice was eerily calm. "You? Or herself?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. I caught a glimpse of the screen, Violet's name, with a heart emoji next to it. Gerald quickly turned the phone face down. "I'm tired," I said, heading toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Gerald slept beside me. Through our bedroom window, I watched his car pull out of our driveway at 2 a.m. 20 minutes later, I drove past Violet's apartment building. Gerald's car was parked outside. Sometimes, the most painful truths come in the dead of night, when the world is quiet enough to hear your heart breaking. But as I drove home alone, something else stirred inside me, something harder and colder than heartbreak. something that whispered of justice. The next morning, I called in sick to work and waited for Gerald to leave. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I began my search. Our home office held 5 years of memories and secrets. "Come on," I muttered, rifling through Gerald's desk drawers. "Where are those medical reports?" The bottom drawer was locked. I remembered the spare key Gerald kept taped under his desk, a habit from his forgetful college days. My hands trembled as I retrieved it. Inside, I found a manila folder labeled Fertility Clinic. The documents looked official at first glance, but something felt off. I snapped photos and texted them to Irene. My phone rang almost immediately. "Grace, look at the letterhead," Irene said without greeting. "The clinic's address is wrong." I just checked their website. "What?" "And the doctor's signature. Dr. Harrison retired 2 years ago. These are fake." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. How would Gerald even? "Wait," Irene cut in. "Doesn't Violet work at a printing company?" The pieces clicked into place. I remembered Violet bragging about her graphic design skills, about how she could replicate any document perfectly. At the time, I thought she was just proud of her work. My phone buzzed with another call. "Gerald." I declined it and texted, "Working through lunch. Talk later." I dug deeper into the drawer and found a small notebook. Inside were dates, times, and locations, all meetings between Gerald and Violet going back months. Some entries had little hearts drawn next to them. "Irene," I choked out. "I need you to come over." "Now." She arrived 15 minutes later with coffee and determination. "We're getting to the bottom of this today." We spent the next hour documenting everything. The fake medical reports, the secret meetings, the suspicious bank transfers to Violet's account labeled consulting fees. "Look at this," Irene pointed to a receipt. Gerald had his own fertility tests done at a different clinic 3 months ago. I called the clinic, putting on my best professional voice. "Hi, this is Dr. Walker's office. We need to verify some test results for Gerald. There seems to be a discrepancy in our records." The receptionist was helpful, too helpful. "Oh yes, poor Mr. Gerald. Such a difficult diagnosis. Complete azoospermia. He'll never be able to father children naturally. Did he not follow up with a genetic counselor as recommended?" My hand covered my mouth to stifle a gasp. Irene grabbed the phone. "Thank you, that's all we needed." She hung up and pulled me into a hug. "Oh, Grace." "It was never me," I whispered. "He's the one who can't," and they made me think. A key turned in the front door. Gerald was home early. "Quick," I hissed, shoving everything back into the drawer. We barely made it to the kitchen when Gerald walked in. He stopped short at the sight of Irene. "What's going on?" His eyes darted between us. "Girls' lunch," Irene said smoothly. "Grace needed company since you've been so busy lately." Gerald's phone chimed. He checked it, and I caught that familiar flash of guilt in his eyes. I need to handle something at work," he said. "Don't wait up for dinner." After he left, Irene grabbed my shoulders. "You need a lawyer." "Now." "I know someone," I said quietly. "Jeremy, from college. He specializes in family law." Jeremy agreed to meet us that afternoon. In his downtown office, I laid out everything we'd found. "This is substantial," Jeremy said, reviewing the evidence. "The forged medical documents alone are criminal. But Grace, there's something else you should know." He pulled up a legal document on his computer. "Your husband had a trust fund that would only activate when he had his first child. Significant money, we're talking millions. So that's why." The pieces kept falling into place. "They needed you to think you were the problem," Irene said. "So you'd step aside voluntarily." Jeremy leaned forward. "Grace, you have options. We can file for divorce immediately, expose everything." "No," I said, an idea forming. "Not yet. I need you to help me with something else first." "What do you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. "Remember those eggs I froze 3 years ago, before my cancer scare? I want to know if they're still viable." Jeremy's eyes widened. "Grace. And I want to know my legal rights regarding Gerald stored sperm samples from our IVF attempts." Irene grabbed my hand. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" I nodded slowly. They wanted to take everything from me, my marriage, my chance at motherhood, my dignity. But they made one mistake. What's that? Jeremy asked. They underestimated how far I'd go to get justice. I straightened in my chair. So, Jeremy, can you help me? He smiled grimly. Let's talk strategy. Your eggs are perfectly viable, Dr. Chen confirmed, reviewing my medical records. And since you and Gerald signed joint ownership forms for all fertility treatments, you have equal rights to the stored genetic material. I sat in her office a week later, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. And the chances of success? With your age and health, very good. But Grace, she leaned forward. Are you sure about this? Having a child is a lifetime commitment, not a revenge plot? I finished. Trust me, Dr. Chen, I've wanted to be a mother my entire life. They tried to steal that from me. She nodded slowly. We'll need to do some preliminary tests first. As I left the clinic, my phone buzzed. Gerald's message read, working late again. Don't wait up. I typed back a simple okay and called Jeremy. Everything's set, he said. I've documented all the legal permissions. They can't stop you, even if they find out. They won't, I replied. Not until it's too late. That evening, Irene came over with takeout and wine. We sat on my back porch, watching the sunset. I saw Violet today, Irene said carefully. At the mall. She was shopping for wedding dresses. The wine glass froze halfway to my lips. Already? Apparently, they're planning a spring wedding. 6 months from now. I set down my glass. Perfect timing. Grace, Irene touched my arm. Are you absolutely sure about this? Having a baby, it's not something you can undo. I had my first IVF consultation this morning, I said. Dr. Chen thinks we could start the process next week. We? You mean? I've asked her to be discreet. As far as anyone knows, I'm just a single woman using a sperm donor. I managed a small smile. Technically, that's not even a lie. Irene's phone chimed. She checked it and her face darkened. You need to see this. It was a social media post from Violet, a photo of her hand wearing an enormous engagement ring, captioned, "Said yes to forever with my soulmate." Sometimes love takes unexpected paths to find its true destination. Unexpected paths? I laughed bitterly. Is that what she's calling it? There's more, Irene scrolled down. She's been telling people you abandoned Gerald because you couldn't handle the fertility issues. My hands shook as I reached for the wine bottle. Of course she has. The next morning, I met with Jeremy again. His office felt like a war room, with documents spread across his desk. I've set up everything, he said. Separate bank accounts, documentation of their affair, proof of the forged medical records. When the time comes, they won't know what hit them. And the fertility clinic? All paperwork is in order. They can't legally inform Gerald about any procedures. I pulled out my phone, showing him the engagement announcement. They're getting married in 6 months. Jeremy's eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. It's perfect, I said. By then, I'll be ready. Grace, Jeremy set down his pen. As your lawyer and friend, I need to ask, what's your endgame here? I met his eyes. Justice. Truth. And the family they tried to convince me I couldn't have. Later that day, I visited the fertility clinic for my first hormone injection. As the nurse prepared the shot, I thought about all the times I'd done this before, with Gerald holding my hand, both of us full of hope. Now I sat alone, but somehow feeling stronger. All done, the nurse said cheerfully. Remember, no strenuous activity for the next few days. That night, Gerald came home late again. I pretended to be asleep as he crept into bed, smelling of Violet's signature perfume. My phone lit up with a text from Dr. Chen, first follicle scan scheduled for Thursday. Looking good so far. I turned away from Gerald's sleeping form and typed back, I'll be there. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor's appointments and hormone injections. I told Gerald I was taking yoga classes, joining a book club, anything to explain my absences. He barely noticed, too wrapped up in his secret romance with my sister. Your body is responding perfectly, Dr. Chen said during one checkup. The egg retrieval should be next week. And then? She smiled. Then we fertilize them with the stored samples and wait. Are you ready for the possibility of multiple births? With your numbers, we might need to implant several embryos. I thought about Gerald and Violet, planning their perfect life together, thinking they'd won. I'm ready for anything, I said. Whatever it takes. Dr. Chen made some notes in my chart. In that case, let's schedule the retrieval for Monday. As I left the clinic, I touched my stomach gently. Soon, I thought. Soon they'll learn that karma doesn't just come around. Sometimes it multiplies. Triplets, Dr. Chen announced, pointing at the ultrasound screen. All 3 embryos took. See these 3 strong heartbeats? I lay on the examination table, tears streaming down my face as I watched the tiny flutters on the monitor. After all the deception, all the pain, here was my miracle, times 3. I'll give you a moment, Dr. Chen said softly, stepping out of the room. I pulled out my phone and texted Irene, 3. I'm having 3 babies. Her response was immediate. OMG. On my way with ice cream. By the time I got home, Gerald had left another note. Weekend business trip with the partners. Back Sunday. I knew he was really at a romantic getaway with Violet. They'd gotten bolder lately, not even trying to hide their meetings anymore. Irene arrived with 3 pints of ice cream. 1 for each baby. I'm going to get so fat, I laughed, already showing at 12 weeks. You're going to get caught if you stay here, she said, suddenly serious. You can't hide 3 babies forever. Already handled, I patted the stack of papers on my coffee table. Jeremy found me a house in Cambridge. I move next week. What about Gerald? I left divorce papers on his desk this morning. Cited irreconcilable differences. I spooned ice cream into my mouth. He'll be too relieved to question it. The divorce went through quickly. Gerald, eager to start his new life with Violet, agreed to all my terms. He never noticed the careful wording Jeremy had included about genetic material rights. For months later, I waddled through my new home, setting up the nursery with Irene's help. 3 cribs, she marveled, assembling the last one. Are you sure you can handle this alone? I'm not alone, I smiled. I have you, don't I? My phone buzzed. A text from Jeremy. Wedding date set. May 15th at the Grand Hotel. Perfect timing, I muttered. I'll be ready. The babies arrived 2 weeks early on a stormy April night. 3 perfect little girls, Lily, Rose, and Iris. As I held them for the first time, all thoughts of revenge momentarily faded. They were mine, wholly and completely mine. They look just like him, Irene whispered, cradling Lily. They do, I agreed. That's rather the point. The next few weeks passed in a blur of midnight feedings and diaper changes. The girls were surprisingly good babies, taking turns being fussy as if they'd coordinated their schedules. One morning, as I was feeding Rose, my phone lit up with a wedding invitation, sent to my old email address. They were inviting me, probably to prove there were no hard feelings. Your mommy's going to that wedding, I told Rose, who blinked up at me with Gerald's eyes. And you 3 are going to help her tell the truth. At 6 weeks old, the girls had their first photo shoot. Professional photos for documentation, Jeremy had insisted. Legal proof. These are perfect, Jeremy said, reviewing the photos in his office. The resemblance is undeniable. Have you seen the latest about their wedding? He pulled up Violet's social media. She'd been posting about fertility treatments, setting up her story about finally giving Gerald the family he deserved. She's telling everyone she's pregnant, Jeremy said. Due in December. I laughed. Well, won't that be interesting to explain? That evening, as I rocked Iris to sleep, I got another text from Gerald, the first since our divorce. Violet told me about the wedding invitation. I hope you'll come. We'd like to make peace. I showed the message to Irene, who was burping Lily. Make peace, she scoffed. More like show off their perfect life. Little do they know, I smiled, watching my daughters sleep. Little do they know. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Jeremy helped me gather all the documentation, DNA tests, fertility clinic records, proof of Gerald's condition, evidence of their affair, and the forged medical records. Are you ready for this? He asked, organizing the files. Once you do this, there's no going back. I looked at my girls, all three napping in their swings. They tried to convince me I couldn't be a mother, that I was broken. They need to face what they did. And the fallout? Sometimes, I said, touching Lily's tiny hand as she slept, the truth hurts. But lies hurt more. The wedding was 2 weeks away. I had everything prepared, the documents, the photos, the DNA tests. But most importantly, I had 3 beautiful baby girls who were about to turn their father's wedding into an unveiling of truth. Your daddy and aunt thought they could fool everyone, I whispered to my sleeping daughters. But you 3 are living proof of their lies. And soon, everyone will know. Violet's planning to announce her pregnancy during the reception toasts, Irene reported, scrolling through her phone. She'd maintained a friendly social media relationship with my sister, becoming our inside source. She's even wearing a loose dress to hint at a baby bump. I adjusted Rose's tiny bow while Lily and Iris napped in their carriers. How considerate of her to set the perfect stage. Grace, Irene set down her phone, walk me through the plan one more time. The ceremony starts at 2, I said, checking my own timeline. They'll do photos after, then the reception begins at 5. Violet plans to make her announcement during the toasts at 6. And you'll arrive. At 5:45. Jeremy will already be there as a guest. He's bringing all the documentation. The girl's nanny will wait with them in the hotel lobby until I text her. My phone buzzed. A message from Jeremy. DNA test results certified by the lab. Ironclad proof of paternity. The week before the wedding crawled by. I spent it rehearsing my speech, preparing the girls' outfits, and making sure every detail was perfect. The night before, I could barely sleep. Mommy's going to need you 3 to be on your best behavior tomorrow, I told my daughters as I fed them their morning bottles. It's going to be a big day. Irene arrived early to help me get ready. She zipped me into a sleek navy dress that showed off my post-baby body. All those midnight feeding sessions had melted the pregnancy weight faster than I'd expected. You look amazing, she said, adjusting my hair. They won't know what hit them. The nanny, Sarah, arrived at noon. We'd hired her specifically for this day, after thorough background checks and several trial runs with the girls. Remember, I told her, wait in the lobby with the girls until I text. If anyone asks, you're watching them for a hotel guest. Got it, Sarah nodded, already familiar with our plan. Don't worry, they'll be perfect. My phone lit up with messages throughout the afternoon. Jeremy, in position. Half the town is here. Irene, ceremony just ended. Violet looks smug as hell. Jeremy, reception starting. You ready? I checked my reflection one last time. Ready. The Grand Hotel loomed before me, its elegant facade masking the drama about to unfold inside. I texted Sarah, get the girls ready. 20 minutes. The reception was in full swing when I walked in. Heads turned as I passed, whispers following in my wake. I spotted Gerald and Violet at the head table, lost in their own world. Jeremy appeared at my elbow, manila envelope in hand. Everything's set. Violet's father is about to start the toasts. I positioned myself near the back, watching as various family members stood to congratulate the happy couple. Finally, Violet rose, champagne glass in hand. Before anyone else speaks, she beamed, one hand resting on her stomach. Gerald and I have an announcement. I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah. Now, the ballroom doors opened. Sarah entered with the triple stroller, my 3 beautiful girls dressed in matching white dresses. The room fell silent. I have an announcement too, I said, my voice carrying across the stunned crowd. Gerald, Violet, meet your daughters. Well, Gerald's daughters, to be precise. Gerald's face went pale. Violet's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. That's impossible, Gerald stammered. I can't. Can't father children? I walked forward, Jeremy beside me with the documents. Funny how you never told Violet about that diagnosis. About your genetic condition. About how you let her blame me instead. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Violet's mother stood up, staring at the babies. They look just like Gerald. Because they are his, I said, taking the envelope from Jeremy. DNA tests prove it. Remember all those fertility treatments we did, Gerald? All those samples you provided? Turns out they worked after all. You had no right. Violet shrieked, her carefully constructed facade cracking. Actually, I had every right. I handed the legal documents to Gerald's father, a retired judge. Check the paperwork yourself. Everything was completely legal. Guests crowded around the stroller, exclaiming over the girl's resemblance to Gerald. His mother reached in to touch Lily's cheek, tears in her eyes. But I'm pregnant, Violet protested weakly. Are you? I raised an eyebrow. Like you were infertile? Like those medical records you forged? Should we wait 9 months to see if that's another lie? Gerald slumped in his chair, the truth finally hitting him. Triplets, he whispered. Yes, I smiled, lifting Rose from the stroller. Would you like to meet your daughters? Or should I say, your only children? Because we both know you'll never have any others. The room erupted in chaos. Violet's makeup streaked down her face as she ran from the room. Gerald's parents were demanding explanations. And in the middle of it all, my 3 perfect baby girls began to cry in perfect harmony, their wails echoing through the destroyed wedding reception like a symphony of justice. How could you do this to me? Violet emerged from the bathroom, her wedding dress wrinkled, mascara streaking her cheeks. Your own sister. How could I? I bounced Iris gently as she fussed. How could you forge medical documents to convince your sister she was barren? How could you steal her husband while pretending to support her? Gerald's mother cradled Lily, tears streaming down her face. They're so beautiful, Grace. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked. Or would you have believed their lies, like everyone else did? Gerald hadn't moved from his chair, staring at Rose in his father's arms. I don't understand, he mumbled. The doctors said I couldn't. That's right, Jeremy stepped forward, spreading medical records on the table. You were diagnosed with complete azoospermia 3 months before you left Grace. But instead of telling her the truth, you let your girlfriend hear forged documents blaming Grace for everything. The wedding guests huddled in groups, phones out, documenting every moment of the unfolding drama. Violet's father approached, his face red with rage. You've ruined everything, he shouted at me. No, Gerald's father interrupted, still holding the DNA test results. Your daughter ruined everything. These documents prove it. The forged medical records, the affair, it's all here. Violet collapsed into a chair. Gerald, tell them it's not true. Tell them we're having a baby. Gerald finally looked up, his face ashen. Are we, Violet? Are we really? The silence that followed was deafening. I was going to figure something out, Violet whispered. Figure something out? Gerald's mother's voice rose. You were going to fake a pregnancy too? More gasps from the crowd. Phones kept recording. Someone muttered, this is better than reality TV. Mrs. Anderson, I turned to Gerald's mother, would you like to know your granddaughters' names? She nodded eagerly, still holding Lily. You're holding Lily. Your husband has Rose, and this is Iris. I smiled at the babies. I thought they deserved names as beautiful as they are. Flower names, Gerald whispered. Like your grandmother's garden. The grandmother who raised me after our parents died. I looked at Violet. The grandmother you were too busy to visit when she was sick. Violet's makeup was completely ruined now. You always got everything. The attention, the love, the perfect life. I just wanted what I had. I finished for her. Well, congratulations. You got my husband. But I got something better, the truth. And 3 beautiful daughters who will never have to wonder if they're worthy of love. Gerald stood suddenly. Can I hold one? The room went quiet again. I hesitated, then carefully transferred Iris to his arms. He stared down at her tiny face, his hands shaking. She has my mother's nose, he choked out. They all do, I said softly. And your eyes. And your chin. I'm their father, he whispered, reality finally sinking in. I have daughters. I corrected him. You had your chance at being their father. You lost that right when you chose lies over truth. Violet lunged forward. You can't keep them from him. They're his children too. Actually, Jeremy stepped in, she can. The divorce agreement you so eagerly signed included very specific language about genetic material rights. Grace has full custody. You gave up any claim to children conceived through IVF when you signed those papers. But I didn't know. Gerald protested. No, I took Iris back from him. You didn't know because you were too busy planning your new life with my sister to read what you were signing. Too busy believing her lies to see the truth. The wedding planner appeared, nervously wringing her hands. Should I tell the band to start playing? A laugh rippled through the crowd. Violet's mother stood up. This wedding is over. Everyone go home. As guests began filing out, many stopped to peer at the babies, to touch my arm in support, to glare at Violet and Gerald. Their perfect wedding had become the perfect scandal. Grace, Gerald called as I prepared to leave. Please, can I be part of their lives? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since entering the room. The man I'd once loved, now reduced to a stranger in a groom's tuxedo, begging for scraps of what could have been his. You know what the saddest part is? I said quietly. If you'd just been honest about your condition, we could have faced it together. We could have been a family. Instead, you chose lies. I turned to the nanny. Sarah, let's take the girls home. As we walked out of the ruined wedding reception, 3 perfect babies sleeping peacefully in their stroller, I heard Violet's wail echo behind us. Gerald, where are you going? But I didn't look back. Some chapters need to end before better ones can begin. The aftermath hit like a tsunami. By morning, videos of the wedding confrontation had gone viral. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from reporters, distant relatives, and strangers offering support. You're trending on Twitter, Irene announced, scrolling through her phone while feeding Rose. People are calling you #Revenge Queen. Great, I sighed, changing Lily's diaper. Just what I wanted. Internet fame. My doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw Gerald's mother standing on my porch, holding what looked like a photo album. Should I let her in? Irene asked. I nodded. She deserves to know her granddaughters. Grace, Gerald's mother, rushed in, hugging me tightly. I'm so sorry. We had no idea what they were doing to you. She set the album down and immediately went to the babies. May I? Of course, I said, watching as she gently lifted Iris from her swing. I brought something, she gestured to the album. Gerald's baby photos. I thought you might want to see the resemblance. We sat together, flipping through pages while the girls napped. Every photo showed just how strongly my daughters had inherited their father's features. He's a fool, his mother said suddenly. Both of them are. Violet's been calling the house nonstop, trying to explain, but she shook her head. There's no explaining this away. My phone buzzed. A message from Jeremy. Gerald's at my office. He wants to negotiate visitation rights. No, I typed back. He made his choice. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Violet. Don't open it, Irene warned, but I was already heading to the door. My sister stood there, still wearing yesterday's makeup, clutching a stack of papers. Grace, please. Just listen. Why should I? Because I'm pregnant, she blurted out. For real this time. I just found out. I laughed bitterly. With Gerald's baby? We both know that's impossible. No, it's not Gerald's. Her voice cracked. It's Marcus's. From the printing company, where I got the papers forged. Gerald's mother gasped behind me. Does Gerald know? He does now. Violet wiped her eyes. He left me last night. After the wedding, he said he couldn't trust anything I'd ever told him. Karma's funny that way, I said, starting to close the door. Wait. She thrust the papers forward. These are all the originals. The forged documents, the fake test results, everything. I'm turning myself in. I needed you to know I'm sorry. Before I could respond, another car pulled up. Gerald stepped out, looking like he hadn't slept. What are you doing here? Violet asked. Same as you, I guess, he said, not meeting her eyes. Trying to make things right. There's no making this right, I said firmly. I know, Gerald ran his hands through his hair. But our daughters. My daughters, I corrected. Please, he stepped closer. I'll do anything. Therapy, parenting classes, whatever you want. Just don't keep them from me forever. One of the babies started crying inside. Gerald's face crumpled at the sound. You lied to me, I said quietly. Both of you. You made me think I was broken, that I was less of a woman because I couldn't give you children. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I was scared, Gerald admitted. When I got my diagnosis, I couldn't face it. And then Violet suggested destroying my life instead of dealing with yours? I'm turning myself in, Violet repeated. The document fraud, the conspiracy. I'll plead guilty. Inside, all 3 babies were crying now. Gerald's mother went to tend to them, leaving us in this twisted family tableau on my front porch. I have to go take care of my daughters, I said. You both need to leave. Grace, Gerald called as I turned away. Will you ever forgive us? I looked at my sister, then at my ex-husband. 2 people I'd once loved more than anything, now strangers wearing the faces of betrayal. Forgiveness isn't something you earn by saying sorry, I replied. It's something you earn through actions, through change, through time. Right now, all I see are 2 people who got caught in their lies and want absolution. What can we do? Violet asked. Live with your choices, I said. Like I had to live with your lies. And maybe someday, when my daughters are old enough to understand, I'll let them decide if they want to know the whole story. I closed the door on their protests, returning to my babies. Gerald's mother was successfully calming them, humming an old lullaby. You're stronger than I ever knew, she said softly. I picked up Lily, breathing in her sweet baby scent. I had to be, for them. Outside, I heard car doors slam, engine start. The sound of consequences driving away, leaving 3 perfect reasons to look forward instead of back. Look what came in the mail, Irene said, handing me a newspaper clipping while Lily and Rose played with blocks on the floor. Iris was napping in her swing. The headline read, Local woman pleads guilty to document fraud, conspiracy. Below was Violet's mugshot, her face drawn and pale. 6 months probation and community service, I read aloud. Plus mandatory counseling. Are you okay? Irene asked. Before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Gerald's mother stood outside with a familiar-looking box. I found this in our attic, she said, setting the box on my coffee table. Your grandmother's recipe collection. Violet took it after she passed, but, well, it belongs to you. I opened the box, inhaling the scent of old paper and memories. I thought these were lost forever. Like a lot of things, she said, picking up Rose as she toddled over. Gerald asked about the girls again. He's been going to therapy, Irene added. Every week, according to his mother. I know, I said, watching Lily stack another block. His therapist contacted me, asked if I'd consider family counseling. The room went quiet except for the baby's babbling. Gerald's mother bounced Rose gently. And will you? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to keep them far away from all that pain. But another part. My phone buzzed. A text from Jeremy. Gerald filed for voluntary child support. No strings attached, no custody demands. Just wants to contribute. He's trying, his mother said softly. Trying doesn't undo what they did. No, she agreed. But it might help build something new. Lily pulled herself up using the coffee table, reaching for her grandmother. These moments, watching my daughters discover their world, seeing them loved by family who chose truth over lies, made everything worth it. The doorbell rang again. This time it was my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's someone sitting in a car outside. Been there for hours. Should I call the police? I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Violet sat in her car, just staring at the house. I'll handle it, I said, handing Lily to Irene. The autumn air was crisp as I walked to Violet's car. She rolled down her window, revealing dark circles under her eyes. I lost everything, she said without preamble. Marcus left when I got convicted. My job, my friends, everyone knows what I did. That's what truth does, I replied. It reveals who we really are. I see them sometimes, she nodded toward my house. At the park with you. They're beautiful. They are. I'm getting help, she said quietly. Real help, not just the court-mandated stuff. I needed to understand why I hurt you like that. A laugh drifted from my open front door, Lily or Rose, discovering some new delight. I don't expect forgiveness, Violet continued. I just needed you to know I understand now. What I took from you. What I tried to destroy. But you didn't destroy me, I said. You tried to break me, and instead, I became stronger. I became a mother, not because of you or Gerald, but in spite of you both. She nodded, tears falling. Can I see them sometime? Not now, but someday. That's not my decision anymore, I replied. Someday, they'll be old enough to choose for themselves. Until then, my job is to protect them, including from people who might hurt them like you hurt me. I understand, she whispered. Thank you for at least listening. As she drove away, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. The weight of betrayal lifting, replaced by the strength of survival. Inside, my daughters were having dinner, Gerald's mother and Irene helping with the chaos of feeding 3 toddlers. Everything okay? Irene asked. Actually, yes, I said, taking my place between Lily and Rose's high chairs. For the first time in a long time, everything's exactly as it should be. Iris threw her spoon, giggling as it clattered to the floor. Rose immediately did the same, followed by Lily, their synchronized mischief a reminder of how they came to be. You know, Gerald's mother said, retrieving the spoons, sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into. I looked around my kitchen, at Irene, who stood by me through everything, at Gerald's mother, who chose truth over loyalty, at my 3 beautiful daughters, who gave me the strength to fight back. You're right, I smiled, wiping spaghetti sauce from Lily's chin. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. Rose reached for me, sauce-covered hands and all, and I pulled her close, not caring about the mess. Because sometimes, the most perfect moments come after the hardest battles, and the sweetest victories aren't about destroying your enemies. They're about building something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to destroy.
I stared in disbelief as my ex-husband Baxter sauntered through the doors of the community center, his new fiancée Lola clinging to his arm. The air in the room suddenly felt stifling, and my grip tightened on the flyer I had been distributing for my small business. This was the last place I wanted to run into them. Baxter's gaze swept the room until it landed on me, a smug grin spreading across his face. Well, if it isn't my dear ex-wife, Evangeline. Fancy seeing you here. He had the audacity to chuckle, as if this was all some big joke. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed. Baxter, Lola. I acknowledged them with a curt nod, my eyes narrowing slightly. What are you doing here? Can't a man and his future wife enjoy a night out in our quaint little town? Baxter drawled, his arm tightening around Lola's waist. Or is that too much to ask? Lola glanced up at Baxter, her brow furrowed in confusion. Baxter, who is this woman? She asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Baxter let out a dramatic sigh. Lola, darling, this is Evangeline, my ex-wife, the one I told you about, remember? He turned to me, his gaze hardening, the one who tried to bleed me dry in our divorce. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, and I had to resist the urge to slap that arrogant smirk off his face. That's not how I remember it, Baxter, I retorted, my voice sharp. As I recall, it was you who refused to pay a single dime in alimony, thanks to that prenuptial agreement you forced me to sign. Baxter's eyes narrowed, and I could see the fury bubbling just beneath the surface. Ah, yes, the prenup, the one that saved me from your greedy clutches. He leaned in, his breath tickling my ear. Face it, Evangeline, you got nothing out of that marriage, and you never will. I clenched my jaw, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. How dare he stand there and mock me, as if our entire marriage had been nothing but a farce. You may have won that battle, Baxter, but mark my words, I'm not done fighting. I glanced at Lola, my heart aching for the young woman who was clearly unaware of Baxter's true nature. You may have found a new plaything, but I won't let you hurt my son the way you hurt me. Baxter let out a loud, grating laugh. Your son? Please, Theo is as much mine as he is yours, and as for hurting him, well, that's your own fault for being such a lousy mother. He leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a menacing whisper. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stay out of my way, Evangeline. This is my life now, and I'm not about to let you ruin it." With that, he turned on his heel, Lola trailing behind him, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. I watched them go, my heart racing with a familiar mix of anger and helplessness. Baxter may have won the battle, but I was far from done. I would fight for my dignity, my son, and my future, no matter the cost. The drive home from the community center was tense, the silence in the car thick with unspoken emotions. I could feel Theo's eyes on me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I forced a small smile, reaching over to give his hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just caught off guard, that's all." Theo's expression darkened. "I can't believe he had the nerve to show up here with that woman, and the way he talked to you." His jaw clenched, and I could see the anger simmering in his eyes. "I know, honey, but we can't let him get to us." I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Baxter may have won the battle with that prenup, but I'm not about to let him win the war. "What are you going to do?" Theo asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of hope and trepidation. I pressed my lips into a thin line, my mind racing. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm not giving up without a fight. That prenup may have left me with nothing, but maybe there's a way to challenge it." Theo's eyes widened. "You mean you're going to take him to court again?" I nodded, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I have to, Theo. I can't let him continue to walk all over me, or you. He needs to be held accountable for his actions." Theo was silent for a moment, then he reached out and placed his hand on my arm. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever you decide to do, I'm here for you." I felt a surge of pride and love for my son, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Theo. I knew I could count on you." I smiled, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "Now, let's go home and see what we can dig up on that prenup of ours." As I sat at my desk, poring over the stack of documents related to my divorce, a sense of frustration and bitterness welled up inside me. Baxter had been a master manipulator, using his wealth and power to tip the scales in his favor. That prenuptial agreement had been the bane of my existence, leaving me with nothing after years of marriage and a lifetime of memories. "There has to be something we're missing," I muttered, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "Baxter couldn't have been that clever." Theo leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. "What about this clause here?" he said, pointing to a paragraph of dense legal jargon. "It looks like it might have a loophole." I squinted, my brow furrowing as I read through the fine print. "You know, you might be onto something. This section seems a bit vague." A spark of hope ignited within me, and I felt a surge of determination. "Theo, call Jasmine. I think it's time we take another look at this prenup." Theo grinned, already reaching for his phone. "I'll get right on it, Mom. Let's show Baxter who he's messing with." As Theo made the call, I allowed myself a small smile. Baxter may have thought he had me beat, but I was just getting started. This was my chance to reclaim my life, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Theo and I worked tirelessly with Jasmine, my trusted lawyer, to uncover the truth behind Baxter's prenuptial agreement. It was a meticulous process, sifting through mountains of financial records and legal documents, but I was determined to leave no stone unturned. Jasmine's sharp eye and keen legal expertise were invaluable as we began to piece together the puzzle. "It's all starting to make sense now," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Baxter used some very clever and underhanded tactics to conceal his assets during the divorce proceedings." I felt a surge of anger course through me, my hands clenching into fists. I knew he was a snake, but this is a whole new level of deceit. Theo placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to make him pay for this." Jasmine nodded, her expression grim. "Absolutely. We've got more than enough evidence to challenge the validity of that prenup. Now it's just a matter of getting it in front of a judge." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. Then let's do it. I'm ready to show Baxter that he can't get away with this. As we prepared to present our case in court, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of trepidation. Baxter had always been a formidable adversary, and I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, when we arrived at the courthouse, Baxter was already there, flanked by his team of high-powered attorneys. He shot me a smug grin as I passed by, and I had to resist the urge to wipe it off his face. Well, if it isn't my ex-wife, the financial genius," Baxter drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I must say, I'm impressed that you managed to dredge up all this evidence." He let out a derisive laugh. "But you and your little team of misfits are no match for my legal juggernaut." I clenched my jaw, refusing to be intimidated. "We'll see about that, Baxter. This time the truth is on our side." Jasmine stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Wright, I'd advise you to take this matter seriously. The evidence we've uncovered is more than enough to invalidate that prenuptial agreement." Baxter scoffed, his gaze sweeping dismissively over Jasmine. "Oh, please. Do you really think a two-bit lawyer like you can outmaneuver my team of legal experts? This is going to be a cakewalk." Theo stepped up beside me, his expression determined. "Don't underestimate us, Baxter. We're not going to let you get away with this anymore." Baxter's eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his features, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. "We'll see about that, Theo," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This time I'm going to make sure you and your mother lose everything." With that, he turned and strode into the courtroom, his lawyers trailing behind him. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I refused to let Baxter's threats shake my resolve. I had come too far to back down now. Jasmine placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Don't worry, Eva. We're going to make him pay for his lies and deceit. This time, justice is on our side." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Then let's do this." As the court proceedings unfolded, I watched with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. Jasmine and her team presented our evidence with precision and conviction, slowly but surely chipping away at the carefully crafted facade that Baxter had built around his financial empire. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding a new layer of complexity to the narrative. Employees, business partners, and even a few of Baxter's former associates came forward, testifying to his underhanded tactics and dubious accounting practices. Baxter, in turn, fought viciously, unleashing his team of high-priced lawyers in a relentless effort to discredit our witnesses and cast doubt on the evidence. But with each passing day, it became increasingly clear that his defenses were crumbling. One particularly pivotal moment came when a former accountant, a man named Gerald, took the stand. His testimony was damning, revealing a complex web of offshore accounts and shell companies that Baxter had used to hide his assets during our divorce. Mr. Wright would regularly instruct me to falsify financial records and divert funds to untraceable accounts, Gerald stated, his voice steady and unwavering. It was all part of an elaborate scheme to ensure that he wouldn't have to pay a single dime in alimony or child support. The courtroom erupted in a murmur of shock and disbelief, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. Baxter's face had turned a deep shade of red, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table in front of him. "Objection, Your Honor," one of Baxter's lawyers shouted, jumping to his feet. "This witness is clearly biased, and his testimony is nothing more than hearsay." The judge, however, remained unswayed. Overruled. The witness's testimony is relevant and admissible. She turned her stern gaze towards Baxter. "Mr. Wright, you would do well to refrain from any further outbursts." Baxter's jaw clenched, and I could see the rage simmering behind his eyes. But he remained silent, his shoulders stiff as he sank back into his chair. As the proceedings continued, the tide began to turn against Baxter. The media coverage of the case had grown increasingly intense, with reporters digging into his past and uncovering a trail of shady business dealings and unethical practices. Suddenly, the once untouchable Baxter Wright found himself the target of public scrutiny and outrage. His business ventures began to crumble as investors and partners sought to distance themselves from the growing scandal. "This is a disaster," Baxter growled, pacing back and forth in the courthouse hallway. "How could this be happening?" I couldn't help but feel a small twinge of satisfaction as I watched him unravel. "Maybe if you hadn't spent so much time trying to deceive everyone, this wouldn't be happening," I replied, my voice laced with a hint of smugness. Baxter's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his finger jabbing the air in front of my face. This isn't over, Evangeline. I'm going to make you and that pathetic son of ours pay for this. I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. Go ahead and try, Baxter, but this time the truth is on our side. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Baxter to stew in his own anger and frustration. As I rejoined Theo and Jasmine, I couldn't help but feel a sense of renewed hope. The tides were turning, and the road to justice was finally in sight. As the trial progressed, the noose around Baxter's neck tightened with each passing day. The evidence we had uncovered, thanks to Jasmine's tireless efforts, painted a damning portrait of his deceitful and manipulative behavior. One particularly significant development came when we stumbled upon a complex scheme Baxter had orchestrated to hide assets during our divorce. Jasmine and her team worked tirelessly, combing through financial records and tracing a tangled web of offshore accounts and shell companies. "This is it, Eva," Jasmine said, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "We've got him dead to rights. The court is going to have no choice but to invalidate that prenup." I felt a surge of relief and anticipation, but also a tinge of apprehension. "Are you sure, Jasmine? Baxter has always been able to wriggle his way out of these kinds of situations." Jasmine nodded, her expression resolute. "Absolutely. The evidence is ironclad. Baxter's little game of financial hide-and-seek is about to catch up with him." I couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. After years of being on the defensive, the tables were finally turning. Baxter's arrogance and overconfidence had been his undoing, and I was more than ready to see him reap the consequences of his actions. As we returned to the courthouse for the next round of proceedings, I could feel the tension in the air. Baxter and his team of lawyers were visibly on edge, their faces etched with a mixture of frustration and desperation. Jasmine wasted no time in presenting our findings, her voice clear and confident as she laid out the details of Baxter's elaborate scheme. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional gasp of shock and disbelief as the magnitude of Baxter's deception became increasingly clear. Baxter, for his part, tried to remain composed, but his usual swagger and bravado had been replaced by a thinly veiled panic. When Jasmine finally concluded her presentation, he rose to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "Objection, Your Honor," he shouted, his voice trembling. "This is all a fabrication, a desperate attempt to smear my reputation and take what is rightfully mine." The judge, however, remained unmoved. "Sit down, Mr. Wright, or I will have you held in contempt of court." She turned her gaze to Jasmine, her expression grave. "Miss Lee, the evidence you've presented is quite compelling. I will need some time to review it thoroughly, but it appears that the prenuptial agreement may indeed be invalid." Baxter's face contorted with rage, and he slammed his fist on the table, causing the courtroom to erupt in a shocked murmur. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, his eyes wild. "I won't stand for this." Theo, who had been sitting quietly beside me, leaned in and whispered, "Looks like the mighty Baxter Wright is finally getting a taste of his own medicine." I couldn't help but agree, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Yes, my dear," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It seems karma has finally caught up with him." As the judge adjourned the proceedings for the day, Baxter stormed out of the courtroom, his lawyers trailing behind him like a pack of frenzied vultures. I watched him go, feeling a sense of triumph and relief wash over me. This was a victory, to be sure, but I knew that the battle was far from over. Baxter was a formidable and relentless opponent, and I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Still, in that moment, I allowed myself to bask in the satisfaction of seeing justice begin to prevail. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension as we reconvened for the final showdown with Baxter. Jasmine had assured me that our case was rock solid, but I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. Baxter was a master manipulator, and I knew he would stop at nothing to protect his ill-gotten gains. As Baxter strode into the room, his gaze swept across the faces of the judge, the jury, and finally settling on me. His lips curled into a sneer, and I could see the raw fury burning in his eyes. "Well, well, if it isn't my dear ex-wife, Evangeline," he drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "I must say I'm impressed that you've managed to drag this circus out for so long." I clenched my jaw, refusing to be baited. "Save it, Baxter. Your games are over." Jasmine stepped forward, her expression unwavering. Your Honor, we are prepared to present our final evidence against the validity of the prenuptial agreement between Mr. Wright and Ms. Reed. The judge nodded, her gaze stern. Very well, Miss Lee. You may proceed. Jasmine launched into a meticulously detailed presentation outlining Baxter's elaborate scheme to conceal assets and manipulate the financial records during our divorce proceedings. She called witnesses, presented documents, and systematically dismantled Baxter's defense, leaving him visibly rattled. At one point, Baxter attempted to interrupt, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to discredit the evidence. Objection, Your Honor. This is all a fabrication, a blatant attempt to rob me of what is rightfully mine. The judge, however, remained unfazed. Overruled, Mr. Wright. Ms. Lee's presentation is factual and well substantiated. I would advise you to refrain from further outbursts. Baxter's face flushed with fury, and I could see the veins in his neck pulsing. But he remained silent, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Jasmine. As the presentation drew to a close, Jasmine turned to face the judge, her expression solemn. Your Honor, based on the overwhelming evidence we have presented, we are confident that the prenuptial agreement between Mr. Wright and Miss Reed is null and void. Baxter Wright's blatant deception and manipulation have rendered the agreement invalid, and we respectfully request that it be set aside. The courtroom erupted in a murmur of anticipation, and I felt Theo's hand squeeze mine, his eyes shining with hope. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as the judge considered Jasmine's words. After what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared her throat, her gaze sweeping across the room. Having carefully reviewed the evidence presented by Miss Lee, I find that the prenuptial agreement between Mr. Wright and Miss Reed is indeed invalid. Baxter Wright's fraudulent actions and concealment of assets have rendered the agreement null and void. The courtroom erupted in a thunderous applause, and I felt a surge of relief and triumph wash over me. Theo pulled me into a tight hug, his voice choked with emotion. "We did it, Mom," he exclaimed. "We finally beat him." I held my son close, tears of joy streaming down my face. "Yes, Theo, we did. Justice has finally been served." As I turned to face Baxter, I saw the true depth of his defeat. His face was ashen, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For once, the man who had always seemed untouchable was finally being held accountable for his actions. "This isn't over, Evangeline," he snarled, his voice trembling with rage. "I'll make you pay for this, mark my words." I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Baxter, this time it is over. Your reign of deceit and manipulation has come to an end." With that, I turned and walked away, knowing that I had finally reclaimed the power he had taken from me all those years ago. In the aftermath of the court's ruling, Baxter's once formidable empire began to crumble at an alarming rate. The public scrutiny and legal repercussions of his fraudulent activities had a devastating impact on his business ventures and personal life. I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and pity as Baxter's world came tumbling down around him. His fiancée, Lola, was the first to abandon ship, her eyes filled with a betrayal that cut him deeper than any legal setback. "How could you do this, Baxter?" she cried, her voice laced with a raw, emotional pain. "All this time I thought you were this successful, upstanding businessman, but you're just a liar and a cheat." Baxter for once was rendered speechless, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, as Lola gathered her belongings and stormed out of their shared apartment. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the young woman, despite the animosity I held towards Baxter. She had been an unwitting pawn in his twisted game, and I knew all too well the sting of being betrayed by the person you trusted the most. But my empathy for Lola was quickly overshadowed by the sense of justice being served. Baxter's business ventures, once a source of his immense wealth and power, began to crumble under the weight of the revelations that had come to light during the court proceedings. Investors and partners, once loyal to Baxter, now scrambled to distance themselves from the tainted empire he had built. Lawsuits and investigations piled up, and Baxter found himself facing the very real prospect of financial ruin. "This is all your fault, Evangeline," he snarled, cornering me outside the courthouse one day. "If you had just left well enough alone, I could have continued living in peace." I met his gaze, unflinching. "This is the consequence of your own greed and deceit, Baxter. You brought this upon yourself." He let out a frustrated growl, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I'll make you pay for this, mark my words. I'll take everything from you, your business, your son, your pathetic excuse for a life." I couldn't help but feel a pang of fear at his words, but I refused to let it show. "Threatening me won't do you any good, Baxter. The damage has been done, and you have no one to blame but yourself." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his own rage and despair. As I rejoined Theo and Jasmine, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. "It's over, Theo," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Baxter's reign of terror is finally coming to an end." Theo wrapped his arms around me, and I could feel the tension in his body slowly dissipate. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You never gave up, and now we can finally move on with our lives." I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Yes, my dear. And not only that, but I believe it's time we do something to help those who were wronged by Baxter's misdeeds." Jasmine, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward, her eyes shining with understanding. "I think that's an excellent idea, Eva. We have the means to make a real difference in the lives of those Baxter has hurt." As we began to formulate a plan to use my settlement to support Baxter's other victims, I couldn't help but feel a sense of renewed purpose. Baxter's downfall had been a long and arduous journey, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and now it was time to ensure that his legacy of greed and deceit would never be forgotten. As the dust settled on Baxter's downfall, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unsure of where to go next. The settlement I had received from the invalidated prenup had given me a newfound financial freedom, but the journey to get there had left me feeling drained and uncertain. Theo, however, was brimming with excitement, his eyes shining with hope for the future. "Mom, this is our chance to start over. We can do anything we want now." I couldn't help but smile at his infectious enthusiasm. "You're right, Theo, but I have to admit I'm not quite sure where to begin." Jasmine, ever the pragmatic advisor, stepped in with a reassuring smile. "Well, Eva, I think the first step is to take a breath and really consider what you want to do with this opportunity. This settlement isn't just about you, it's about building a better future for you and Theo." I nodded, her words resonating with me. "You're absolutely right. I want to make sure we do this the right way, without falling into the same traps Baxter did." Theo reached out and squeezed my hand, his expression earnest. "Whatever you decide, Mom, I'm with you. We're in this together." I felt a swell of pride and gratitude for my son, his unwavering support, a constant source of strength. "Thank you, Theo. I couldn't have done this without you." After much deliberation, Theo and I decided to use a portion of the settlement to expand my small business, finally giving it the resources it needed to thrive. Jasmine assisted us in navigating the legal and financial aspects, ensuring that we were making wise, sustainable choices. The rest of the settlement, however, was set aside for a more altruistic purpose. Inspired by the resilience and determination I had shown in my own battle against Baxter, I decided to establish a foundation to support other single mothers in our community. "This is an incredible idea, Eva," Jasmine said, her eyes shining with approval. "You've been through so much, and now you have the opportunity to help others who are in a similar position." I nodded, a sense of purpose filling me. "Exactly. Baxter's actions hurt so many people, and I want to make sure that his legacy doesn't continue to haunt others. This foundation is my way of reclaiming my story and using it to empower women like me." Theo gave my arm a gentle squeeze, his smile warm and proud. "I think it's an amazing idea, Mom. You're going to change so many lives with this." As we worked tirelessly to bring the foundation to life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and fulfillment. It was as if the darkness that had once clouded my life was slowly but surely being replaced by a renewed sense of hope and purpose. And then one day, as I was finalizing the details of the Foundation's mission and programs, I received an unexpected call. It was Baxter, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Evangeline," he began, his words laced with a hint of desperation. I need your help." I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. After all the pain and suffering he had caused, a part of me wanted to simply hang up the phone and never speak to him again. But something in his tone gave me pause. "What is it, Baxter?" I asked, my voice cautious. I've lost everything," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, My businesses, my investments, my reputation, it's all gone. I have nothing left. I felt a twinge of pity, despite myself. I see. I paused, considering my next words carefully. What do you expect me to do about it? Baxter let out a defeated sigh. I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping you might be willing to spare some of your settlement to help the others I've hurt. I need to make amends, Evangeline. I need to make this right. I was taken aback by his request, the sincerity in his voice something I had never witnessed before. For a moment, I was silent, weighing my options. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady. Very well, Baxter. I'll see what I can do. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Baxter's fall from grace had been swift and unforgiving, but in the end, it seemed that even he had found the humility to seek redemption. With a renewed sense of purpose, I turned my attention back to the foundation, determined to ensure that my story would not be defined by Baxter's betrayal, but by the triumph of resilience and compassion.
I cut off my parents 6 months ago after a blow-up over Golden Child, bro. But they responded in the worst way possible, but I got my revenge. I've always been the type of guy who wanted to build something from scratch. My own empire, sort of speak. Real estate had been good to me, sure, but after grinding day in and day out, showing houses and closing deals, I realized I was ready for something bigger. Something that was all mine. So, about 6 months ago, I made the choice to quit my job and dive headfirst into the entrepreneurial life. No more showing up in suits and smiling at clients all day. It was time to be my own boss. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed the night before I handed in my resignation. I was scrolling through my phone, looking at motivational quotes, trying to pump myself up for the big move. It wasn't just cold feet. It was more like stepping off a ledge hoping I had a parachute strapped on. But I needed this change. The thrill of starting my own business had been eating away at me, and I knew if I didn't make the move now, I'd probably never do it. The morning I quit, my boss didn't take it too well. He thought I was making a huge mistake, throwing away a lucrative career for some pipe dream. But it's not like I hadn't thought this through. I had been saving up for this moment. Every commission I earned over the last few years had been meticulously tucked away, preparing for the day I'd step out on my own. After quitting, I set up a little office right in my living room. Nothing fancy, just a desk, my laptop, and piles of research. I spent days and nights mapping out my business plan. From potential clients to market strategies, I laid everything out. I was going to start a property development firm. Unlike just selling properties, I wanted to create them, turn visions into reality, Realizing I'd need a bit more than just enthusiasm and savings to kick things off, I thought about bringing in some heavy hitters, my parents. My dad has been running a car dealership with his brother for the better part of 30 years, and my mom handles all their accounts. Their experience in managing a successful business could be the backbone I needed. Plus, having them on board meant more than just financial support. Their expertise was gold. So I planned to lay it all out at our next family dinner. It was a regular thing for us, getting together once a week to catch up. That week, I was more nervous than usual. I rehearsed my pitch over and over, even while driving to their place. I didn't just want them to invest. I wanted them to believe in this as much as I did. Dinner was as normal as ever. Mom made lasagna, Dad talked about his latest golf game, and I was sweating bullets. When everyone was nearly done eating, I cleared my throat and decided it was now or never. So, I've got something big to share, I started, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I quit my job. I'm starting my own business in property development. I've been working on this plan for months now. The table went silent. Mom looked at me, a fork midair, her eyes wide. Dad set his glass down slowly, processing the news. That's a big step, Dad finally said, his voice cautious but not dismissive. Tell us more about this plan of yours. I walked them through every detail, the market research, the funding I'd need, the growth potential. I even pulled out my laptop to show them the projections and the fancy presentation I'd put together. They listened, really listened, asking questions and even offering some initial advice. By the end of the night, I felt good about it all. They hadn't agreed to invest yet, but they seemed impressed and promised to think it over. It was the best I could have hoped for. As I was packing up my things, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation, my younger brother, Matt, clapped a hand on my shoulder. Big moves, huh? I'm proud of you, man, he said, giving me a half smile. He'd been quiet most of the night, which I figured was just him being his usual self, more interested in his sales job and probably his next date than in family business talks. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Mom asking me to come over for another dinner. just a casual invitation, or so I thought. When I arrived, it was just the usual setup, but the air felt different. Matt was there, which wasn't strange, but he had this smirk on his face that I couldn't quite figure out. Halfway through dinner, he dropped his own bombshell, metaphorically speaking. "I've been thinking a lot since our last dinner," he began, all eyes suddenly on him. "And I decided I'm going to start my own business too." I choked on my water. "What?" I managed to cough out. "Yeah, real estate business. Figured it's about time I took a shot at it too. You really inspired me, man," he said, looking straight at me. His announcement felt like a sucker punch to the gut. I was stunned. Not just by his decision, but by the timing. It felt too coincidental, like stepping into some weird competitive reality show without signing up for it. Our parents were quick to react, smiling and congratulating him. "That's wonderful, Matt," Mom exclaimed, always the encourager. I tried to muster up a smile, but it felt plastered on. The rest of the evening was a blur of Matt talking about his plans, which sounded eerily similar to mine, except it was clear he hadn't thought them through as I had. Matt's announcement hung over me like a dark cloud as I drove back home from our parents' house that night. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. It wasn't just the shock of him diving into real estate, a field he'd never shown any interest in before, but the timing of it all. It felt like he saw the attention I got from our parents and decided he wanted in, no matter the cost. I tried to brush it off, keep my focus on what I needed to do. After all, I had a business to build, and dwelling on Matt's sudden interest in real estate wasn't going to help me get investors or clients. But it was easier said than done. The idea that he might be trying to compete with me, or worse, outshine me, kept playing on repeat in my mind. I needed to talk to someone about it, so I called up my best friend Joe, who had known me and Matt since we were kids. "Hey man, you got a minute?" I asked as soon as he picked up the phone. "For you? Always. What's up?" Joe's voice was calm, a good sign that he was probably just chilling at home. "It's about Matt. He's decided to start his own business too, in real estate." I rushed out the words, almost relieved to share them. There was a pause on the line. "Isn't that what you're doing?" Joe finally asked, his tone laced with confusion. "Exactly," I sighed. "Feels like he's just doing this to one-up me. I mean, he's never even talked about real estate before this." Joe was quiet for a moment, probably thinking it over. "Do you think your parents will back him instead of you now?" he asked, hitting right at the heart of my worries. "I don't know, man. They seemed really pumped about his idea at dinner. It's like they were waiting for him to show interest in something like this. That sucks. But hey, you've been planning your business for months. You've got a solid plan and actual experience in the field. Don't let this throw you off." His words were meant to be encouraging, but they did little to ease the knot in my stomach. We talked a bit more, mostly Joe trying to cheer me up, but by the time we hung up, I felt only slightly better. The truth was, I had no idea how to handle this new twist in my already complicated family dynamics. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the looming threat of Matt's new business venture. I spent hours tweaking my business plan, reaching out to potential clients, and even scouting locations for potential development projects. I was determined to prove to my parents, or maybe to myself, that I could make this work with or without their help. Meanwhile, Matt seemed to be moving full steam ahead with his own plans. I heard snippets from our mom whenever we talked on the phone, though I tried to steer the conversation away from business as much as possible. "He's really excited about it," Mom would say, her voice bright and full of pride. "He's been talking to some of your dad's business friends, getting advice, and making connections." Each update felt like a punch in the gut. It was clear Matt was using every resource our parents had, something I had hoped to do, but now felt increasingly awkward about asking for. The unfairness of it all kept me up at night, the frustration simmering just below the surface. One evening, as I was going over some legal documents for my business, I got a text from Matt out of the blue. It was casual, almost too casual, considering the circumstances. "Hey, just wanted to check in and see how your stuff is going. Maybe we can grab a beer sometime, talk shop," the text read. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, still hurt by what I perceived as his betrayal. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if maybe I was misreading the situation. Maybe he was just trying to make his own way, and it wasn't about competing with me at all. With a heavy sigh, I typed out a reply. "Sure, let's meet up this weekend." The meetup was awkward at first. We chose a local bar, neutral ground, and sat at a corner table with a couple of beers. Matt seemed genuinely happy to see me, clapping me on the back and grinning as he sat down. "So, how's the real estate mogul life treating you?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He chuckled, shrugging a little. It's a lot to learn, man. But I'm getting there. What about you? Everything on track? We talked business for a while, skirting around the tension that lay between us. It was clear he was enthusiastic about his new path, his eyes lighting up as he talked about potential projects and what he'd learned so far. It's crazy, you know? I never thought I'd be into this kind of thing, but after hearing you talk about it, I couldn't stop thinking about it, Matt said at one point, his tone earnest. I nodded, sipping my beer. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's rewarding. As the evening wore on, the initial stiffness between us eased a bit. It wasn't like old times, not really, but it was a start. By the time we said goodbye, I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. At another dinner a couple of weeks after my brother's announcement, my parents told me that they would only be able to invest in one of us, and if they had to pick someone to bet on, then it would be my brother. Funnily enough, they told me that he also wanted to start working in the real estate business like I was, even though he had no knowledge about that field and had never expressed any interest in learning about it prior to my announcement about wanting to start my own business. I was very upset when my parents told me that they wouldn't be investing in my business and would rather place their bets on my brother instead. I didn't say anything to them for a while and was just trying to process the bad news. When my brother decided that he was going to try and console me, but it just turned out to be pretty condescending. He told me that I didn't need to worry, and that if I wanted to, then I could join him, even though it wouldn't be an equal partnership. He just wanted me to have something at the very least. I thought that was a horrible thing to say to me, especially at a moment when I was trying to come to terms with the fact that my parents favored my brother over me. I had always known that deep down, but it just hurt to realize it all over again, and to get to know that what I believed was true. After what my brother said, I lost my cool and got into a really nasty fight with him where I accused him of trying to steal my ideas because he had none of his own. I called him a copycat and told him to get a personality that didn't revolve around me. I brought up a couple of incidents from the past, when we were in school where he would just constantly try to do everything that I did and try to beat me at my own game or whatever, but would consistently fail. And I told him that that's what would happen to him this time as well, so he needed to be prepared for it. My brother also got mad, and rightfully so, and told me that it wasn't his fault that our parents preferred him over me because it was very evident why they favored him since he was just better. It was kind of petty and immature, and my parents tried to break it up by insisting that they love both of us equally. But they just believed that my brother had more business acumen as compared to me, and even suggested that I do join him as if I actually would. My brother went to business school, but I had experience in the real world, and I knew what I was doing because I had been a real estate agent. He didn't have any of the experience that I did, and did not know what he was talking about, so I couldn't figure out why. My parents would just assume that he would be better at this than me without even giving me a chance. The only possible explanation was that they had a favorite, and it was very obvious to me that they did, but it was not me. The brother was the golden child, and there was no running away from it anymore. But after that day, I decided I was going to have no contact with my family, because it was just very insulting to be treated that way, like I was an idiot up to no good. It's been 6 months and I haven't spoken to them. My parents tried to reach out to me a couple of times after I left that day, but when I didn't reply, they stopped trying. After a few weeks, I haven't really attended any family events in the past couple of months either, and I have kept to myself even during the holidays because I don't want to run into them anywhere since I know it'll just be really awkward for all of us. It's best to just avoid all of it. I just haven't been in touch with them in any capacity, and I actually prefer it that way. However, about 2 weeks ago I found out something that really shocked me. My longtime girlfriend of almost 3 years now, and I was taking a trip for the weekend. It was supposed to be a short romantic getaway where I was going to propose to her. She decided to take a shower a couple of hours after we reached the place. And while she was in there, I wanted to charge my phone, but I couldn't find my own, and figured that I had probably just left it at home. So I decided that I was going to use hers instead. Her phone was on charge, so when I grabbed it, I noticed that she had received several texts from my dad, whose contact she had saved by name. It was unusual because I couldn't imagine any conversations that she would need to have with my parents, especially when I got no contact with them. And even though we have a strict no snooping policy, I broke it for just that once, and I'm so glad that I did. I had to guess her password because she had changed it, and I didn't know the correct one anymore. But thankfully, I figured it out. On the second try, it was her sister's birthday, and they're pretty close-knit. And then I went through the text and realized that they had been on speaking terms for several months now. I realized that most of the things that she would send were pictures of my business plan, a list of investors, locations that I wanted to set up, and just several other business-related documents that were confidential and my girlfriend was aware of. I usually work out of our living room, and she had easy access to those documents. So I wasn't surprised that she had been able to get her hands on them, but I was shocked to my core that she was sending those things to the last people I would want. I knew for a fact that my father would 100% use this against me to help my brother get ahead of me. I also figured out why my girlfriend was selling me out because after everything that she sent him, my dad would specify a certain amount of money and would inform her that it had been sent and she would confirm that she had received it. So she was selling me out quite in the literal sense of the phrase. And I was disgusted when I realized what was going on because she was actually spying on me for my parents in exchange for money. And it wasn't just pictures of documents and paperwork that was integral to the business that I was setting up, but she would also tell him other things about me. Like who? From the family I met with, what I told my relatives about them. And worst of all, she would even rat me out whenever I would talk badly about them or my brother, even to her, and she would get paid for all of it. For context, my girlfriend is a freelance writer. She used to have a stable job, but she quit and decided to strike out on her own a couple of months after we started dating because I had told her that I would support her until she was able to support herself. And that hadn't happened yet. So I was still covering rent for her as she lived with me. I couldn't understand why she needed the money so desperately that she was willing to sell me out and sabotage our relationship. I never asked her to contribute to any expenses, and just wordlessly kept working and paying for everything, while she tried to save whatever little she earned herself. And I had never made her feel bad about it. She didn't even borrow money from me for her personal expenses, which was great. But that's just about how independent she was. And I would say that I had a huge role to play in her having a home and food to eat every day. I'm not even bragging about it, it's just a fact. So her going out of her way to screw me over for some extra cash was pretty much insane and straight out of a badly made film or something. I was extremely disturbed when I saw that. And within a split second, I made up my mind that I was going to leave that very instant. I hadn't unpacked any of my bags yet, so I grabbed all my stuff and made my way to the parking lot of the hotel as quickly as I could. And once everything was in the car, I started driving back home. I didn't stop for a break or check my phone until I had put considerable distance between me and the hotel. And finally, after almost 2 hours of driving, I stopped at a gas station because I was feeling nauseated and needed a can of soda. It was then that I finally checked my phone, and I had about 10 missed calls and way too many texts from my girlfriend. She was panicking about where I was and kept asking me if something was wrong and said that she was really worried. She even said that she didn't know what was wrong. But if I was going through something, then I needed to just come back and talk to her and we could sort it all out. So I guess that she hadn't realized that I knew about her spying on me for my parents. I didn't know what to say to her, so I decided to just stop everything, take a break, and think about everything for a while. I was horrified by the fact that my girlfriend of so many years had been spying on me for my parents, and I was feeling everything all at once: betrayed, hurt, angry, and sad. But then I got to thinking and decided I was not going to let these people get the better of me and run away. I was going to make life hell for them. So I turned back around and started driving back towards the hotel, because I had a plan in mind when I returned to the hotel room. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, but I knew the truth now and had to do my best to pretend that everything was normal. I was repulsed by her, but I still acted as though I was fine, and told her that the reason that I had been gone for so long without an explanation was because I was planning something for her, and I just freaked out for a bit in the middle of it. So I had to take some time out and calm down. She seemed confused until I went down on one knee and told her that I wasn't freaked out anymore, and that it was the thought of spending the rest of my life with her that really helped me make sense of things. And now I knew that I was doing the right thing. She was really happy and accepted instantly, which just makes me think about how it's so insane that while she was stabbing me in the back all along, she was still more than happy to get married to me. After that, I told her that I wanted to reconnect with my parents, to share this news with them, since I'd had enough of our feud. I told her that I didn't want to get married without my family present, and so I thought that it was in all our best interest to just bury the hatchet just to see how she would react to it. She seemed a little put off by what I said, but recovered within seconds, and told me that she believed that it was a great idea and encouraged me to make amends with them as soon as I could. So I texted them right after we got engaged while she spoke to her family and told them about us. They didn't reply for a day, but on the next day of our getaway, I received a text from my father saying that he was happy that I had chosen to apologize to them and make things right, and that they would love to be a part of my life once again. Once that was done, I started making arrangements for the engagement party right away. I told my girlfriend that I would plan it all myself because I wanted it to be a surprise for her to make sure that she didn't get in the way of anything. One of my friends is an event planner, and I got him involved. I hosted the party at my house and invited everybody that my girlfriend and I knew, including her family and her friends. It was a lot of hard work, but I managed to keep everything a secret from her until the very last moment. And I definitely did take her and my family by surprise. On the day of the party, once all our guests had arrived, I decided to make a speech and toast to our relationship. I thanked her and my family for everything that they did for me at first. And then I went on to the big reveal and told everybody that I knew what they had been up to for the last couple of months, and I made sure to make the speech as humiliating as possible. I called my girlfriend a sellout, and I called my parents even worse names, but I had the best insults reserved for my brother, who I believed was the root cause of all of this. And I told him that even though he had access to all my business ideas, now it was just kind of sad because not even his own parents had any faith in him. And in spite of being the golden child, it really got him nowhere since he still had to rely on me to become successful. All of them were pathetic, and I wanted to make sure that everybody in our lives was aware of it now. The party took place a week after I found out about my girlfriend's little arrangement with my family, so I had sufficient time to set everything up and also obtained screenshots of my girlfriend's text conversations with my father from her phone, which was easy now that I knew her password, and I just had to sneak into her phone while she was asleep and then delete all the proof. I had booklets made out of those screenshots that I have collected and had them distributed out to each guest individually. After the speech, just to prove how spineless and psychotic everybody involved in this was, all our guests were stunned, but nobody was more shocked than my family and my girlfriend. She actually left the room crying and refused to come out until everyone was gone. Everybody pretty much cleared out after the distribution of the booklets, but my family stayed and tried to fight me. I wasn't having any of it. And I told them that if they didn't clear the premises, I would call the cops, and then this would turn ugly and whatever was necessary, so it would be better for them if they left. And then they went away. They were probably afraid that if this turned even uglier, then it would be hard to save face among their relatives who had heard everything. And this definitely would become the talk of the town in the next couple of days. So they didn't want any more trouble. I didn't hear from my parents after that, but I did have to talk to my girlfriend that very night. She did leave after the party and has moved back in with her parents, but not before she tore into me that night and told me that I was a horrible human being for putting her through that. She told me that the only reason she was doing that was because she needed the money to fund her little sister's education, since she was about to start med school a couple of months after she graduated. Her sister's still in high school, so that checked out. But I asked her why didn't she just ask for the money from me, and she told me that she was too proud to do it. And when my father offered to give her money in exchange for information on my business and other dealings, she didn't think it through and just accepted it. Apparently, my father had told her that he wanted to know about this because he wanted to help me with the business. But since I wouldn't speak to him, he had no other way and had to resort to these tactics. It didn't even occur to her that he might be using all that information to help my brother instead, even though she knew about the problems that we had been having, and admitted that she had been very stupid not to think this through. But then she turned it around and told me that while what she had done was horrible, what I did was nothing short of psychotic either. She finally figured out that I had known about what she was up to right from the day of our proposal itself. And she told me that I should have just broken up with her that day instead of coming back after driving away just to screw with her and my parents and humiliate them in front of so many people. It was already a given that we were no longer going to be together anymore. But before she left, she told me that she was glad that I'd shown her my true colors because she was about to tell my father that she couldn't spy on me for them anymore and that she was going to call it off after our engagement. And that was the last conversation that we had before she left. Since the night of our engagement party, I haven't spoken to anybody and haven't done anything apart from just going to work and coming back home. I thought that the party and humiliating them would make me feel better about everything, but it really doesn't. And I feel like she did have a point about me coming off worse in this scenario, because what I did was actually pretty psychotic, and I feel bad about it. So, am I the a-hole for throwing my girlfriend the party just to humiliate her? Update 1. Hey guys. So this is going to be a short update, but it's been 2 weeks since my ex and I broke up, and today she came back to grab a couple of things that she had left behind. We didn't talk to each other at all, and the whole time she just pretended that I wasn't even there, which was hurtful. But it was well-deserved. She did something incredibly insane and gave me trust issues for life, and I humiliated her in front of all her friends and her parents. So I guess it's fine now because we can just call it even. It's still going to hurt for a while, but I don't think I can do anything to help it now. I don't owe her an apology, that's for sure. So, thank you for all the help and advice, you guys. I guess it worked because at least I feel better about myself now and about my parents. They still haven't talked to me, and I feel like it's for the best. They already have all my business plans and ideas, which sucks. But there's not really much I can do to help the situation now that the damage is already done. The most that I can hope for is that my brother does the decent thing and doesn't utilize any of it, which seems unlikely because he is human garbage. And also, after the way I humiliated him at my party, I don't think he's going to want to hold back. So things are looking pretty bleak for me right now, on the business front at least. But I hope that I get through it somehow. Update 2. Hi everybody! It's been almost a month since the last update, and I finally embarked on a new business journey today. I know it takes time to set up a new business, but I'm already really excited to finally work and do something that I really enjoy. All the planning and hours that I put into this has finally become fruitful and come to something. And this also means that I have something to take my mind off of my ex. I know that she did me dirty, but that doesn't mean I can't still miss her and the good times that we had. I'm in therapy right now, and I'm trying to work through all the trauma and just process my feelings about everything in general. It's kind of difficult, but now that I have my job to look forward to, I feel like things are going to start looking up for me now. Still no news about my brother or what he's up to, but if I have managed to establish my business before him, then that means I have a head start and I have to make the most of it, so my fingers are crossed. Update 3. So I recently learned that my family is moving away because my brother is going to establish his business in a different state altogether, since he doesn't want to be rivals anymore. I heard this right from the source, because he told me all about it in the really long email, and made sure to mention that he was sorry that I wasn't mentally stable enough to deal with my emotions like any normal, rational adult, and thought that it was okay to throw parties and humiliate people just because I was bad at confrontation. I just wanted to be the center of attention for once, even though I had no qualities that would justify it. But he wished the best for me, and hoped I would stay away from him and our parents. Now, it's been almost 3 months since the night of the engagement party, and I think I'm finally beginning to deal with it and process everything a lot better than I was back then. So, that's great. I also heard that my girlfriend was finally going out on dates with other people now. I was out and about like usual, so I guess everybody's moving on, and so am I. My business is done. All right, and with time I'll be fine again. This story is titled, Confronted My Wife About Her Affair Partner. She laughed and said, "Women can have the cake and eat it too now." So I served her cake. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something real with you. The channel's been slowing down a bit recently, and honestly, I put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "When my wife and I first met, it felt like we were a team. She was confident, ambitious, and had a career in management. I was climbing my way up in coding, relying on my skills and experience instead of a formal degree. Our differences seemed complementary at first. She'd tease me about not having a degree, and I'd joke about her corporate jargon. It was harmless fun, or so I thought. When we got married, we were equals in most ways. Both debt-free, earning similar salaries, and sharing household expenses. Life was comfortable, and we spent our free time enjoying date nights, cooking together, or watching TV. We dreamed of starting a family someday, even setting up one of our spare bedrooms as a future nursery. Then the pandemic hit, and everything changed. Like many couples, we both started working from home. At first, it was manageable. We turned one of the spare rooms into her office while I kept using my existing setup. It felt temporary, so I didn't think much about how it might affect us. But as weeks turned into months, I started noticing subtle shifts. We approached working from home differently, almost oppositely. I'd get up early, make breakfast, shower, and even put on a suit to signal I was in work mode. My wife, on the other hand, rolled out of bed in sweatpants and jumped straight into her workday, often playing games on her iPad between emails. At first, it was just a difference in style. I thought, who cares how she works as long as she gets things done? Portstol. The tension started small. She complained about me closing my office door during meetings, saying it made her feel excluded. I explained that I needed focus during my daily Scrum meetings, but she didn't seem to understand. She started making comments like, "Why are you hiding? We're in the same house all day anyway." It felt like a jab, but I brushed it off. The real strain came when I tried to keep up our routines outside of work. I'd suggest a movie night or cooking something new, and she'd wave it off, saying, "We see each other all day already. Why do we need more time together?" That hurt. We'd always been close, and now she seemed distant, like being in the same house was enough connection for her. Her office partially reopened a few months into the lockdown, and she jumped at the chance to go back. She was eager to be around her coworkers again, and I didn't blame her. I missed office life too, but my company stayed fully remote. She started going in 3 days a week, coming home later and later. At first, I assumed she was just adjusting to the new schedule. But soon, it became clear she wasn't just working late. She was staying out with coworkers for drinks or dinner. I asked her about it once, and her answer was vague. Just the usual crowd, she said, avoiding eye contact. I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. After all, we were both under a lot of stress, right? The distance between us grew. The warmth she used to show was gone, replaced by cold indifference. I started noticing things I'd ignored before, how she'd become secretive with her phone, stepping away to take calls or brushing off texts with just work stuff. She was quieter at home, more withdrawn, and any attempt I made to connect was met with disinterest or outright dismissal. By the time we hit our 5th wedding anniversary, we were like strangers. I told myself it was just a rough patch, something all couples go through. I didn't want to believe that the woman I'd built a life with was slipping away from me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It was a Saturday morning when everything unraveled. My wife handed me her old iPad and casually asked, "Can you wipe this for me? I'm giving it to my niece." It wasn't an unusual request. She often relied on me for tech-related things. I nodded, barely looking up from my coffee, and she left the house soon after, saying she had errands to run. I didn't think much of it. I set the iPad on my desk and planned to reset it later in the day. But as I picked it up to start the process, I noticed it was still logged into her messaging app. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen. That's when I saw the first message. It wasn't from me. It wasn't from anyone I recognized. And it wasn't innocent. At first, I thought I must be misunderstanding what I was seeing. But as I scrolled through the conversation, reality hit me like a truck. There were messages, photos, and videos exchanged between her and her boss. Explicit ones. They'd been having an affair for at least 2 months. I sat there in shock, my hands trembling as I kept scrolling. My brain couldn't process it all. The woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I trusted, had been lying to me. And not just a casual lie. This was calculated, intentional, and brazen. The texts were worse than I imagined. She talked about me, referring to me as boring and too predictable. She complained about my work-from-home routine, mocking the way I dressed up for meetings. One message burned into my memory. "He's so clueless," I could scream. "You're the only thing keeping me sane right now." That line hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought back to all the times I'd tried to bridge the gap between us. The nights I'd suggested we spend time together, the little surprises I'd planned to cheer her up, the patience I'd shown when she pulled away. It wasn't enough for her. Or maybe it was too much. Either way, she'd chosen someone else. After saving everything to a secure cloud drive, I shut the iPad and sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My heart was racing, my stomach churning. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or punch a hole in the wall. Instead, I just sat there, frozen, as the reality of her betrayal sank in. When she came home later that evening, I couldn't even look at her. She breezed through the door, tossed her keys on the counter, and greeted me like nothing had happened. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her tone casual and light. I mumbled something about work and went to my office, shutting the door behind me. My mind raced. Should I confront her? Should I demand an explanation? But every time I imagined the conversation, I felt a wave of nausea. Her lies had been so thorough, so bold. I didn't trust myself to stay calm. The next day, I called a lawyer. I'd never spoken to one before, but I knew I couldn't handle this alone. The lawyer listened patiently as I laid everything out, from the messages I'd found to the growing distance in our marriage. When I was finished, he asked me a simple question. "What do you want to do about this?" "I want a divorce," I said, the words coming out firmer than I expected. He didn't seem surprised. "If that's the case, you'll need more evidence. Courts are unpredictable, and the more proof you have, the better. I recommend hiring a private investigator to gather what we need." He explained that in our at-fault state, adultery could significantly impact the division of assets and alimony, but only if we could present a solid case. "You need to stay calm," he said. "Don't confront her yet. Let her think she's gotten away with it. The more comfortable she feels, the more careless she'll become." It sounded like good advice, but the thought of staying silent felt unbearable. Every time I saw her, every time she smiled at me or made small talk, it felt like another knife in my back. The private investigator worked quickly. Within a week, they had more evidence than I ever thought possible. Photos of her meeting her boss at his apartment, videos of them kissing in the parking lot after work, time-stamped screenshots of their messages. It was all there, laid out in excruciating detail. When the investigator handed me the final report, I felt both vindicated and devastated. There was no denying what she'd done, but seeing it all in black and white, every betrayal documented, was like reliving the pain all over again. By this point, I was barely functioning at home. I avoided her as much as possible, keeping conversations to a minimum and spending most of my time in my office. She didn't seem to notice or care. Her phone was always in her hand, her face lighting up at incoming messages I knew weren't from me. She stopped asking about my day, stopped making any effort to engage with me at all. One night, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "You think I don't know?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. She looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" I stood there, fists clenched. "I know, about you and your boss. I've seen the texts, the pictures, the videos. Don't bother lying." For a moment, she just stared at me, her face a mix of shock and something else, defiance. "And?" she finally said, crossing her arms. "What are you going to do about it?" Her tone, her smugness, it set me off. "What am I going to do? I'm divorcing you. That's what I'm going to do." She smirked, shaking her head. "Oh, please, you won't leave me? Even if you try, I'll get half of everything. You might as well stay. It's better for both of us." Her words, her arrogance, her complete lack of remorse, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. "You think this is a marriage?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that made my blood boil. "Honey, this is the 21st century. A woman can have her cake and eat it too." That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of what she'd done. After that night, everything changed. The woman I'd married, who I thought I knew, was gone, replaced by someone cold and indifferent. Her laughter, the smugness, and those final words, "A woman can have her cake and eat it too," echoed in my head for days. I couldn't stop replaying the moment, feeling the anger boil just under the surface. My lawyer had already told me to keep my emotions in check. "The courts don't favor theatrics," he warned. "Judges care about fairness and professionalism. Any emotional stunts could come back to bite you." I nodded and said I'd keep things civil, but deep down, I wanted her to feel some of the humiliation she'd caused me. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to talk about having her cake and eating it too, I'd make sure she remembered those words for the rest of her life. I started looking for a bakery that could handle custom cakes. After some searching, I found one that offered edible image printing. You could upload any photo, and they'd recreate it in frosting. It was perfect. I went through the evidence I'd gathered, picking a photo that wasn't too explicit, but would still make the message crystal clear. It showed her and her boss in a compromising position, clothed but unmistakable. Above the image, I had the words piped in bold, decorative icing. "Here's your cake. Eat it too." The bakery didn't ask any questions, and I didn't volunteer any details. When I picked up the cake, I couldn't help but smile. It was ridiculous and petty, but in that moment, it felt like justice. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I coordinated with the process server to have the cake and divorce papers delivered to her office. He was an older guy, the kind who'd probably seen it all, but when I told him the plan, he laughed out loud. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "This is going to be a story for the books." The next day, I waited anxiously for his update. When the call came, I answered immediately. "You won't believe the scene," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. I walked into her office during lunch, cake in hand, and asked for her by name. She was sitting with a group of coworkers, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. She confirmed her name, so I set the box on the table, opened it, and put the papers next to it. Then I said, "You've been served." "What happened next?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. She froze at first, just staring at the cake. Then she went pale. One of her coworkers leaned over to look and gasped, "Oh my God!" That's when she completely lost it, screaming, swatting the cake off the table, but it landed face up on the carpet. Everyone saw it. A few people started laughing, and others just walked out. Her boss bolted out of the room without a word. I could picture it in my head. The chaos, the embarrassment, the reality of her actions crashing down on her. It wasn't just satisfying, it was cathartic. The aftermath was immediate. My phone started blowing up within minutes of the cake delivery. Texts, voicemails, missed calls. It was nonstop. At first, I ignored it, letting the notifications pile up. Then her mom texted me. "She's staying with me for now. Please don't contact her unless it's urgent." I laughed at the irony. She was acting like I was the one harassing her. Meanwhile, I hadn't even responded to a single message. That night, I sat in my office, reflecting on what I'd done. The initial rush of satisfaction was fading, replaced by a creeping sense of doubt. My lawyer's warnings echoed in my mind. Judges don't have a sense of humor. Any act of pettiness could hurt your case. Had I gone too far? Would this stunt come back to haunt me in court? I didn't regret the message, but I worried about how it might be perceived. As much as I wanted to see her humiliated, my ultimate goal was to protect myself in the divorce. The last thing I needed was to jeopardize my position because of a cake. The next day, I called my lawyer to come clean. He sighed when I told him what I'd done. Michael, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Judges don't like these kinds of antics. It could make you look vindictive. I wasn't trying to be vindictive, I said defensively. I just wanted to make a point. I get it, he replied. And honestly, it's not the worst thing I've seen. But from now on, you need to focus on the big picture. Leave the drama out of it. I agreed, though part of me still felt like the cake had been worth it. The aftermath of the cake stunt was immediate and far-reaching. By the next day, the story of her public humiliation had spread through her office like wildfire. Mutual friends began texting me, asking if the rumors were true. I didn't reply to most of them, but from the details they shared, I pieced together the scene that had unfolded. Apparently, several coworkers had filmed the cake reveal, and videos were circulating among staff. Her boss, the man she'd cheated with, had immediately distanced himself, refusing to speak to her outside of strictly work-related matters. HR had been alerted, though it seemed like no formal complaints had been filed yet. Meanwhile, her so-called friends at work, the ones who had encouraged the affair, turned on her in an instant. She brought this mess into the office, one of them allegedly said. She deserves whatever fallout she gets. The irony of it all was almost poetic. The same people who had egged her on were now scapegoating her to protect themselves. She was left alone, ostracized, and panicking. At home, things were quieter. She hadn't come back since the cake delivery, opting to stay with her mom instead. That suited me just fine. My lawyer had advised me not to engage with her directly, so I ignored her texts and calls. Most of them alternated between begging for forgiveness and accusing me of ruining her life. I forwarded everything to my lawyer without replying. I'll admit, a small part of me felt guilty. Not for exposing her lies, she deserved that, but for the sheer public nature of it all. It wasn't just our marriage that had fallen apart. Her professional life and social reputation were now in shambles. But every time I started to second-guess myself, I remembered her laughing in my face, telling me I'd never leave her. That memory was enough to quiet any lingering doubts. A week later, she emailed me, asking to come by the house to talk. My lawyer advised me to allow it, but only under strict conditions. Record everything, he said, and have witnesses present. You don't want her twisting the narrative later. I agreed, and 2 mutual friends came over to act as witnesses. We set up our phones to record the conversation and waited for her to arrive. When she walked in, she looked completely different, frazzled, anxious, and far from the confident, smug person I'd confronted weeks earlier. She sat at the kitchen table, avoiding eye contact. I just want to explain, she began, her voice shaky. I don't know what came over me. It's like, it wasn't even me doing those things. I wasn't in control. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You were in control enough to lie to me for months. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might actually take responsibility. But then, she shifted the blame. It wasn't just me, she said. My co-workers. They got into my head. They kept telling me I deserved more, that you were holding me back. I raised an eyebrow. Holding you back how? By trusting you? Supporting you? Providing a home? She flinched at my tone but pressed on. They said you weren't ambitious enough, that I needed someone who could challenge me intellectually. They made me feel like I was missing out. Her excuses made my blood boil. So what? You cheated because a bunch of office gossips psychoanalyzed me behind my back? She looked down at her hands. I'm not saying it's an excuse, I don't know why I let them influence me. Then came the real bombshell. She admitted that the same co-workers, whom she now called the 3 witches, had turned on her after the cake incident. Not only had they cut ties with her, but they'd also started blackmailing her. They were demanding $5,000 to stay silent, threatening to go to HR with all the sordid details of her affair if she didn't pay up. I don't have that kind of money, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sold my car to cover my legal fees, and I'm barely scraping by. Please, I need your help. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. You want me to help you? After everything you've done? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't know where else to turn. I don't want to lose my job on top of everything else. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, and the laughter. I shook my head. There's no going back to normal after this. You need to deal with the consequences of your choices. What should I do? She asked, looking desperate. Report yourself, I said bluntly. Report your boss and your coworkers too. If you give in now, they'll just keep coming back for more. At least if you go to HR first, you can control the narrative. She hesitated, clearly torn between self-preservation and fear. But what if they fire me? Then that's on you, I said coldly. You made this mess. You can't expect me to clean it up for you. Before she left, she asked one last question. What about us? Is there any chance we can fix this? I didn't even hesitate. There is no us. It's over. Get yourself a lawyer and prepare for the divorce. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she just nodded and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind her was like the final nail in the coffin. In the days that followed, I heard bits and pieces about her situation. She hadn't reported herself to HR, and from what mutual friends told me, the blackmail demands were escalating. Her life was spiraling out of control, but I kept my distance. I'd already spent too much time and energy on her. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I just wanted to move on. When the divorce proceedings officially began, I felt a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I was finally taking steps to free myself from her betrayal. On the other, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Divorce is messy, even under the best circumstances, and ours was far from amicable. My lawyer had been preparing for weeks, gathering evidence and documenting everything we could. The affair, the messages, the photos, it was all lined up and ready to present. He reminded me that we were in an at-fault state, which meant her infidelity would play a significant role in determining the division of assets and any alimony claims. Stay calm, he told me before our first court appearance. The evidence speaks for itself. Let her be the one who looks unreasonable. The first hearing focused on temporary orders, how bills and responsibilities would be handled during the divorce process. Her lawyer came out swinging, trying to paint her as a victim. He claimed that the affair was an emotional response to neglect, and that I had withdrawn emotionally and physically long before she cheated. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I kept my face neutral. My lawyer calmly countered, presenting the evidence of her affair and highlighting the timeline. The messages and photos showed that she had been the one withdrawing, lying, and sneaking around for months. The judge seemed unimpressed by her lawyer's arguments and ruled in my favor. I retained control of the house, our shared accounts, and all major financial decisions until the final ruling. After that, things started to unravel for her. She had already sold her car to cover her legal fees, and mutual friends told me she was borrowing money from her parents to make ends meet. The blackmail from her former co-workers hadn't stopped either, and she was visibly struggling to keep her life together. Despite all of this, she kept trying to contact me. Emails, voicemails, and even handwritten letters showed up almost daily. One email stood out, not because it was different, but because it perfectly encapsulated her mindset. "You're ruining my life," she wrote. "How can you just throw everything away like this? We could fix this if you would just stop being so stubborn." It was almost laughable. She still couldn't see that she had done this to herself. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and didn't respond. I wasn't interested in playing her games anymore. The second hearing was where things got more heated. Her lawyer pushed hard for alimony, arguing that her reputation at work had been unfairly damaged and that she deserved financial support to get back on her feet. It was a bold move, considering the evidence of her affair was the reason for her damaged reputation. My lawyer didn't even need to rebut it in detail. The judge dismissed the claim outright, stating that her actions had directly contributed to her situation. The court also reviewed the division of assets. My lawyer made a compelling case for why I should retain full ownership of the house and the majority of our shared savings. He emphasized that I had been the primary financial contributor for years, and that her infidelity had irreparably damaged the marriage. Her lawyer tried to argue for a 50-50 split, but the judge wasn't having it. The final ruling left her with little more than her personal belongings and a small portion of our savings. I kept the house, the car, and the bulk of our assets. She looked completely defeated when the judge announced the decision. For a brief moment, I felt a twinge of pity, but then I remembered all the lies, the laughter, and the arrogance, and that pity quickly faded. Outside of court, she tried one last Hail Mary. She emailed me, suggesting that we attend marriage counseling to rebuild what we had. My lawyer advised me to entertain the idea, not because I was obligated to reconcile, but because it would make me look reasonable in the judge's eyes. Judges like to see that you're willing to compromise, even if it's just on paper, he explained. The counseling session was held over Zoom. She was at her mom's house, and I was in my home office. The counselor spent most of the time trying to assign blame equally, saying things like, "It takes two to create distance in a marriage," and "Both of you need to take responsibility for what went wrong." I refused to engage with the narrative. "I don't agree," I said simply. "This wasn't a mutual breakdown. She made a choice, and that choice destroyed our marriage." The counselor seemed frustrated but didn't push further. At the end of the session, my wife asked if I'd agree to another meeting. "What would it take for us to try again?" she pleaded. I didn't hesitate. "Nothing. There's no going back." I logged off before she could respond. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The court's decision had given me almost everything: my house, my savings, and most importantly, my freedom. She walked away with barely enough to start over, but that wasn't my concern anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Final update. It's been a few months since the divorce was finalized, and I thought I'd finally moved past everything. I rebuilt my life, got my house back in order, and even started finding peace with what happened. But life has a way of circling back to unfinished business. This time, it wasn't about me, it was about her. A mutual friend reached out a few weeks ago with some news about my ex-wife. Apparently, things at her job had taken a turn for the worse. After the cake stunt and the fallout that followed, her office became a minefield of tension. The rumor mill churned nonstop, and her reputation was shot. HR finally stepped in when someone anonymously sent in evidence of her affair with her boss. Photos, messages, everything. I had a pretty good guess who that anonymous person was. She wasn't fired immediately, but they put her under investigation, which effectively destroyed her standing in the company. Her boss, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. HR had no patience for someone in his position abusing power and engaging in an affair with a subordinate. He was terminated within a week of the investigation starting, with security escorting him out of the building in front of everyone. Her three witches friends, those co-workers who had encouraged the affair, didn't stick around to support her. They turned on her completely, throwing her under the bus in their HR interviews to save their own skins. My ex-wife became a pariah in the office, and within a month, she was let go too. That's not the end of it, though. A week after I heard about the investigation, I got an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, "We need to talk about your ex-wife and my husband." Turns out her boss's wife had found out about the affair, and she was furious. Someone at his company tipped her off after the investigation started, and she'd been digging for information ever since. When she finally reached me, she was polite but direct, asking if I had any evidence I could share. At first, I hesitated. Getting involved in someone else's divorce felt messy, but then I thought about everything he and my ex had put me through. He had helped ruin my marriage, and now his wife wanted to take him down. It only felt fair to give her the tools to do it. I forwarded her everything: the photos, the texts, the videos. She thanked me profusely and promised she'd put it to good use. "He's going to regret every second of this," she said. From what I've heard since, she didn't hold back. She filed for divorce almost immediately, and with the evidence I provided, she absolutely destroyed him in court. He lost custody of their kids, had to sell their house to cover the settlement, and was ordered to pay substantial alimony. The cherry on top? His reputation was completely trashed in their social circle. Turns out his wife wasn't shy about sharing the details of his betrayal with anyone who'd listen. Meanwhile, my ex-wife hasn't fared much better. After losing her job, she tried to find work in the same field, but the gossip followed her wherever she went. No one wanted to hire someone with that kind of baggage. Last I heard, she was working part-time at a local retail store and living in a cramped apartment. Her parents have reportedly grown tired of bailing her out financially. They've started distancing themselves, which leaves her even more isolated. Mutual friends say she looks miserable, like the weight of everything she's done is finally hitting her. As for the boss, he's struggling too. With no job, a ruined reputation, and an expensive divorce settlement, he's barely keeping his head above water. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction hearing about his downfall. He thought he could have it all, just like my ex-wife, and now he's paying the price. This whole situation has been a reminder that actions have consequences. For months, I questioned whether I'd done the right thing with the cake stunt, whether exposing her so publicly had been worth it. But seeing how everything played out, I have no regrets. She and her boss tried to tear apart 2 marriages, and now they're dealing with the wreckage they created.